All right. Good day to everyone. I am Gideon Chukwa, right, from Nigeria, and today we'll be looking at vulnerability research, right? Vulnerability research. Firstly, I want to thank Sir Karim, for this opportunity, right, to discuss about vulnerability research with everyone. Now, before we proceed, it's important we know exactly what vulnerability research is, right? What exactly is vulnerability research? Now, vulnerability research, as we can see on the screen, is the process of actively identifying, analyzing, and documenting potential security weaknesses or flaws within software, hardware, or systems, often by various techniques like code review, reverse engineering, fuzzing, and static analysis to discover vulnerability that could be exploited by attackers. Right now, it's pertinent or important for you to know that vulnerability research is a subset of what security research. Security research is more like the bigger picture, right? Vulnerability research is just a part in security research, and it involves a lot of technicalities. Sorry to say, it involves a lot of technicalities, right? There are people we call vulnerability researchers. They engage in things like bug bounty and the likes, right? So it involves a lot of technicalities, and that's what we're looking at today. That's what we'll be dissecting today, right? Now, um, first of all, you have to understand that there's something called vulnerability. And what is a vulnerability? A vulnerability is simply a security weakness or flaw, right? In either a system or a software or a piece of code. That's what a vulnerability is. And we've got different types of vulnerabilities. We've got different categories of vulnerabilities, right? We have software vulnerabilities, we've got hardware vulnerabilities, and both can be exploited. That's why we're here, right? Just to get an introduction to what vulnerability research is all about, right? Now, we'll be looking at, okay, let's see some of these security vulnerabilities before we proceed, right? Now, this is from Rapid 7. Um, a security vulnerability is a weakness, flaw, or error found within a security system that has the potential to be leveraged by threat agents in order to compromise a secure network. We already said this right when we started, and I said there are different categories of vulnerabilities. Now, the most common ones you have broken authentication, SQL injection, cross-site scripting, cross-site request forgery, security misconfiguration. Plenty, right? There are plenty vulnerabilities. But then, before you go ahead exploiting any vulnerability, before you go ahead researching on a vulnerability, first of all, you need to understand how the vulnerability works. Very, very important. You need to understand how the vulnerability works, right? Now, um, for you to actually thrive in vulnerability research, you need to have what we call the hacker's mindset. Hacker's mindset, very, very important, because basically you'll be getting a lot of challenging problems, and it's important you know how you navigate them. Now, there are resources we use um, when performing vulnerability research, and a popular one is from CVE's website, right? Common vulnerability exposures. When you see the website, you get to see a lot of things, right? You get to see a lot of things. Let me close this, right? You get to see a lot of things. You see CV list. Basically, this is where vulnerabilities are being uploaded to, right? Where you see different vulnerabilities that has been exposed before. That's why we call it common vulnerability exposures. You see the vulnerability, you see what um you see more information about them, right? You get to see what they mean and all, right? Basically, this is like a database that houses different vulnerabilities, right? A database that houses different vulnerabilities. You can get to navigate the website, see how it works on your own. See CV lists quite a lot of things, a lot of information, right? Now, another resource I will not talk more on that. Another resource is um, NVD. Now, this is the US repository of vulnerability. Basically, it's like a database that houses a lot of vulnerabilities, right? It's called National Vulnerability Database, right? You get to see quite a lot of things. Look at It's the US government's repository of standards-based vulnerability management data represented using the security blah 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 and all of that. You get to see different CVEs and details or descriptions of those CVEs. What's the mean? You see their severity, right? Is this, basically when categorizing vulnerabilities, we have what we call critical vulnerabilities, we've got high vulnerabilities, we've got medium vulnerabilities, and we've got low vulnerabilities, right? So there are different categories of these vulnerabilities together with their severity. Now, based on their severity is telling you the impact, right? How dangerous is the vulnerability? What can this vulnerability do, right? What's the impact like? How high can it go, right? What's the extent? That's what it's telling you, and that's what this is telling you, right? See different vulnerabilities. For example, let's take a look at this one. You see, okay, let me use this one. You see CV 2024 3210, right? Exposure of sensitive information to an unauthorized actor, vulnerability in easy digital downloads. This issue affects easy digital downloads. Now, you might not know what easy digital downloads is, but if you check a quick Google search when doing vulnerability research, Google is always your friend. Take note of that. Google is always your friend, right? Now, a quick Google search tells us what easy digital downloads happens to be what the best digital e-commerce plugin. If you click on it, you get to see more details, right? The best digital e-commerce plugin for WordPress. And what exactly was this telling us? It's telling us that there was a vulnerability that exposes sensitive information to an unauthorized actor. This is part of our vulnerability research. That's why I said vulnerability research. In doing research a lot, in as much as you are going to be googling, it's important for you to understand the technical terms and understand how you can navigate the information, understand how you can get your information, how you can get the necessary information, right? The necessary intel and all. Now, there's also another resource called 0-day initiative. Basically, 0-day, there are vulnerabilities we call 0-days, right? Basically, it's a vulnerability that has no patch. So just discovered, right? There are no remedies, there are no solutions to it. It's just got discovered. Maybe perhaps as we're speaking now, it's already just got discovered, right? It has no solution, and any system or any device that gets compromised by such 0-day is in serious issue or problem, because there are no solutions, there are no patches to it. Now, another resource which I would like to talk about is exploitdb, right? exploitdb.com. Now, this is a popular resource. Basically, it houses exploits. That's why we call it exploitdb. Stands for exploit database. Suppose you found a vulnerability, right? If you're making research and you came across a particular vulnerability or something, and you actually want to know more about that vulnerability, if possible, if it has any possible exploit, what do you do? That is where exploits database comes into the picture. That's what exploitdb is actually doing, right? So when you come to exploitdb, basically you can see details about a particular let's say version. Maybe you're making research on a particular website, right? Let's say, for example, I'm making research on let's say hack IT. Okay, guess I'm having a bit of slow internet. That's fine. Let's say I'm making research on hack IT, right? Now, there's something called extensions. Right? Now we're going to use a popular extension called Wapalizer. I guess I have it installed already. Let me refresh this. Now we're going to be using Wapalizer, right? And Wapalizer is basically a tool, right? An open source tool for reconnaissance, that's information gathering. Basically, it's used to, check more intel about a particular site. Tell us what it is. Okay, what do you see? We see that using Wapalizer, Hack IT is making use of what? WordPress as the content management system. They run on a database of MySQL, or run the database on MySQL, right? We see they currently have JavaScript libraries installed. You see jQuery UI 1.13.3, core.js 3.39.0, jQuery 3.7.1, and the likes. We see they are making use of PHP, right? Now suppose one is after vulnerabilities. This particular one, jQuery 3.7.1, in the course of your vulnerability research, you could just go to Google and search for what is the current version of jQuery. What do you see? jQuery 3.7.1. That tells us what Hack IT is running on the latest version of jQuery, which is actually good, right? Tells us is running on the latest version of jQuery, which is good, right? Let me disable this for now. Now, somebody might be like, what exactly is in for me in vulnerability research? What exactly is in for me in vulnerability research? Now, it's important for you to know in the course of vulnerability research, it's important for you to prioritize reading articles. Very, very important. You must learn how to read articles, because it is in articles you get to find a lot of details that you possibly don't know about. Remember, no one is an island of knowledge. Now, looking at this article, we are seeing what vulnerability research is. You're taking a new device or a piece of software, figuring out how it is supposed to work down to the very lowest level, and then figuring out if it can be made to do things it's not supposed to do. That's what um, vulnerability research is. You are trying to see if something can function in a way it is not supposed to function. For example, now, okay, you are trying to log into your Facebook account, right? You put in your username and password. When you click submit, what happens? Are you being logged in as another user, maybe as Sakarim, or you're being logged in as Gideon? These are things we look out for in vulnerability research. Now, basically, it's can be distilled into three processes, as you can see on the screen, right? You have the reverse engineering, you have vulnerability discovery, you have exploit development, as you can see on the screen, right? So this is what vulnerability research is all about. What does an average week look like in a vulnerability researcher's life? These are things we should look out for. What do you enjoy about working? This article basically underlines questions that we ask to vulnerability researchers, different vulnerability researchers, and how it is. Now, the most important of them all is how do you break into the vulnerability research industry? Now, you see that reverse engineering and experience with associated tools like debuggers, GDB, of course, disassemblers. It's also good if you're inquisitive and want to find out how things work. An understanding of techniques for vulnerability discovery and exploitation, as well as an understanding of different types of vulnerabilities and how they could be mitigated. Example topics include buffer overflow, DEP, and fuzzing and the likes. Of course, the programming is also an important thing to consider. You can't, if you're not a good programmer or if you don't know about scripting, you can't thrive in vulnerability research. You need it. It's an important skill for you to thrive in what? Vulnerability research. Very, very important. So, reading articles is quite important if you actually want to understand vulnerability research. Like I said, there are plenty of resources. Also, CTFs is also good too. There's something called capture the flag. Now, if you check this Reddit platform, you see that someone asked the question, how do I get started in vulnerability research? The same reason why you are here, you want to know what vulnerability research is. You want to understand, okay, I want to get started. Where do I start from? How do I navigate this thing? When the person asked his question, the person got responses, of course. There's a platform called Over the Wire. It's more like a game simulation. where you get to test your skills, your hacking skills, right? Now, in the course of, or in over the wire, you also get to learn about vulnerability research, vulnerability exploitation too, right? You check when you check these results, you get to see a lot of things, plenty things. Um, in the course of our meeting, these resources will be shared to us, so you can get better understand them very well and understand how to use them. Because research, vulnerability research, just as the name implies, vulnerability research, you're basically making research, and it's an extensive one at that. You're making an extensive research on different vulnerabilities, right? If you also check GitHub has a lot of resources, right? A particular resource, a curated list of all the awesome resources about the vulnerability research. This is very resourceful and very good. When you check it, you get to see articles you need to study, you get to see books, you get to see classes, conferences, different things, which uh is something. You even get to see tutorials, right? Let's open one of these. Get to see tutorials. You get to see tutorials, right? Get to see different tools, what you need. And when we scroll, we get to see the different tools we need for vulnerability research, right? That's why I said reading articles is very important. War games, we already talked about over the wire, right? Over the wire war games. Capture the flags too, very important. You might need to um get familiarized with capture the flags like Pico CTF and the likes. Now, Hack IT offers that, right? In the course of your bootcamp, you're going to get to do capture the flags, and you get to see how some of these stuffs work. So, a lot of resources out there on the internet, plenty of resources. Okay, see this particular resource. Let's open it. Let's see what it has for us. In this particular article, a Windows 10 machine was exploited by a particular vulnerability called off by one overflow. If you get to read it, you get to see how it happened. You get to see different things. These are different articles about exploitation and vulnerability research. So this is quite an extensive resource, right? It houses a lot of things, and we can't possibly talk about everything. But then this is just like an introduction to get you started into what vulnerability research is, what is in for you as a vulnerability researcher, right? There's a lot of money to be made, and very important. There's something called responsible disclosure. We can't talk about vulnerability research without talking about responsible disclosure, because it's important for you to know what responsible disclosure is, so that you don't just go ahead, trying to exploit vulnerabilities that you have um, no authorization to do. Now, what do you see here? Responsible disclosure is an ethical practice in cybersecurity where a security researcher or ethical hacker discovers a vulnerability in a system and privately reports it to the affected organization, allowing them to fix the issue before publicly disclosing the vulnerability to the wider community. Very important, right? After you have gotten your vulnerability, you've researched on your vulnerability, how do you disclose it? And this is what makes us ethical cybersecurity professionals or ethical hackers. You don't just go ahead, doing things anyhow. Now, a platform that um, offers vulnerability research or bug bounty programs is HackerOne, right? HackerOne is a popular um, um, body that offers that, right? You see what vulnerability, you see what responsible disclosure is, and how does it go. First of all, you start with discovery, where hackers find the vulnerability in the system, of course. The next thing is reporting. You report the vulnerability to the affected organization, right? Such as what? Bug bounty platforms. Just like an example of bug bounty platform is HackerOne, just like what we've said, right? Now, verification. They try to verify and vet if that vulnerability actually exists, and if it exists, they try to remediate it then before the disclosure. So this is what you have to know and understand about vulnerability research. This, like I said, is an introduction to what vulnerability research is. Not too much technicalities. It's just for you to get an understanding of what vulnerability research is. How do you get into vulnerability research, and what is in for you? Like I said, there are quite a lot of things. There are recognitions. There's money. Where bug bounty, for example, somebody discovers a bug. Depending on the severity, it gets paid. The money is paid is called the bounty, and it ranges from about 500 um 500 dollars, right, depending on the severity. Some people get paid $10,000, others get paid, $1,000, depending on how um your bug, the severity of the bug. And the last thing I'll talk about is um about a particular YouTuber. If you want to learn more about vulnerability research, is a popular hacker and a popular YouTuber. His name is Nahamsek, right? Nahamsek. We're gonna look at him now. Nahamsek. It's yeah, this is him, Nahamsek. Recently, he won a bounty of $100,000 from Facebook. He reported a critical vulnerability, and he was paid $100,000 for that. So you could get to check him out. See, he talks about, you see, most vulnerabilities in 2025. It talks about a lot of things: how you can get started in vulnerability research, what is in for you, different vulnerabilities, and all of that. I look forward to seeing you on the boot camp. I wish you all the best, and we'll meet some other time. Thank you for your time.